Welcome everybody to another Tuesday Camberley Chess Club Zoom meeting, and tonight we have the pleasure of a Grandmaster, Peter Wells, who's going to take us through what he's billed as exchange sacrifices. Peter's been a long-term England top player, FIDE Master in '82, International Master in '87, and GM in '94, I believe. And I think most people know him for opening books and improving your chess books. And Peter's particularly this evening said he wants lots of audience participation. So Peter, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Martin. Yeah, whether I come to regret asking for lots of audience participation or not remains to be seen. But okay, so exchange sacrifices. I guess I should start with why the topic. Well, I think in a sense, you know, any topic which reflects an interest in imbalances is in itself intrinsically interesting. I think that from a really early stage of our chess lives, well before we think in terms of things like imbalances, we're actually quite conscious of we're sort of subconsciously aware of these things. For example, I mean, as a child, long before I looked deeply into any of the theory of these things, I was very, you know, as most people are, I think, interested in gambits. You know, we look at, we naturally, as a child, look at things where we sacrifice a pawn or something to get rapid development. I think it's one of the early stages of play for many people. And even, you know, I was probably stunting my growth a little bit by playing the knight d7 Caro-Kann at far too early an age. But even during that period, you know, I could have a little bit of impetus with the white pieces and was, you know, very interested in and constantly researching with my friend obscure pawn sacrifices, some of which turned out to be hopeless. Actually, most of them turned out to be hopeless. But I think nonetheless, you develop a sort of feel for the initiative, which is quite useful later on. And then later, you know, you get an idea of the breadth of things that's covered by compensation. So at the beginning, you might look, for example, just at development, speedy development, attack on the king in the center, those kind of things, which the gambits tend to revolve around at that stage. But then later you phase in weak squares, structure, and all those kind of things. And I think right throughout chess, thinking in terms of imbalances is one of the most interesting aspects of the game. And again, I think with exchange sacrifices, if I look back on my own experience of them, I sort of start with a period where they sort of come fairly naturally as a kind of fighting for the initiative thing. And then later in my life, in 2 or 3 different chunks, I got very interested in the kind of theoretical side behind them. And I think, you know, I want to share a little bit of my thoughts on the theoretical side of them, but I think I might kick off, just to ensure that I don't lose people during the theoretical bit, I'll kick off with a practical example, probably from, although it's not from a particularly early age, it's probably from just before the period where I started thinking a lot more and writing a lot more about kind of minor pieces and those kind of things. So can I kick off with an example from a game I played in 1993? A lot of the things, I'm going to try and cover several examples during the talk, and some relatively quickly. So I want to, you know, most of them I won't start from the beginning of the game, but I think this one, the interesting action happens early enough that it's worth kicking off for move 1, if that's okay. So this is against Andrew Ledger, who I obviously just mentioned in the context of the just finished British Championship, who played extremely well. This wasn't one of his finest games, I think it's fair to say, and he made a rather rash pawn it's a Grunfeld, and he made a rather rash pawn break in the opening. We'll come to that in a moment. Okay, so if anyone's got any questions as we go through, stop me, but I don't really intend to discuss the opening because it's not tremendously relevant to the theme. I don't know why I'm clicking in the moves. I should be just right arrow clicking in the mindless manner. Okay, so an exchange Grunfeld, and this was right back in 1993. I was already quite a devotee of the kind of, then as it was, fairly modern variation of the exchange, where white plays rook b1 with the intention in many cases of sacrificing a pawn with d5, for example, if black plays c6, knight c6. Andrew played it in one of the ways which is quite sensible, quite rational, quite in keeping with kind of Grunfeld aims, but trying to avoid a very theoretical battle early on by just developing with b6. I still think it's one of the very decent systems to look at for black. Although there are probably in the sharp lines 1 or 2 actual problems with this now, which is why we see a bit less of it than we used to. Bishop b7 and now queen d3 to defend the pawn. And now black constantly has to keep a lookout for the move d5 by white. So he took and played e6, which is one of several ways of reasonably dealing with d5. Rook d1. I mean, black has the constant option of bishop a6, and white's moves sort of reflect an awareness of that. In this position, bishop a6 is one decent move. Knight d7 perhaps would be another. I can't exactly remember the theory anymore, but what black played is definitely a little bit on the rash side. After queen d7, bishop g5, black decided to try and put some pressure. I mean, obviously the first line of pressure in the Grunfeld is to put pressure on the d4 pawn. The second sometimes, and you know, it has applicability in some cases, is to attack the center with the f5 break. I think the f5 break here is rather perilous, as we'll see, but you can kind of see a light square based motivation for it. So black played f5, I took, rook takes, and now I think I made the right organization of my pieces. I quite wanted the move knight e5 because I'm quite keen to activate this bishop on e2. And obviously I need to keep an eye on the bishop on g5 as well, but I don't want to retreat it because I think it's pretty well placed. So I played queen e3. And again, you know, there's some thoughts of pressure against e6, but my main idea is probably to play knight e5 and bring the other bishop into play. Black needs to emphasize, you know, he's made some concessions and he needs to emphasize the strengths of his position, hence bishop d5. So he has this nice square for the bishop. And I think it's fair to say that this bishop is sort of shaping up to be black's best piece, certainly his best minor piece. Okay, the queen can put in a claim, but the bishop's a pretty strong piece. So knight e5, queen b7. So some vague efforts to threaten. In fact, bishop g2 may be threatened at this point, although after the move I make, bishop g2 is not an issue anymore because that bishop is going to get trapped. So I play bishop g4 to drive the rook back to f8. And if black had taken on g2, I have essentially f3 trapping the bishop. Is that sort of reasonably clear to everyone? Okay, this is the position I wanted to just reflect on a moment. So there's a lot of good things going on for white. I have the makings of some kind of attack on the king side. Black, on the other hand, has, you know, he has decent bishops. He has an excellent bishop on d5, perfectly respectable bishop on g7. He's just slightly lagging in development. And this lag in development is one of those kind of clues, I suppose, that it might be the moment to try and do something a little bit special.